Mary Drake.
I'm like dazzled by your new look. Look at your skin and your hair. And then finally you have black hash poopies, which are totally retro, which I love. You put a really good package together.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the third of this review series. My name is Joshua Drake, Epictastic Joshua. If you are new here, and if you're a returning member, welcome back. I talk movies, TV, music, and anime. And we're going to talk about, unfortunately, the weak spot here in this franchise, and that's going to be Beverly Hills Cop 3. Yeah, this is a 1994 film that was directed by Jon Landis. This is the third movie into the franchise, and this stars Eddie Murphy. This time we have Judge Reinhold, and unfortunately there is no Taggart here. So the premise of this movie is that we find Alex Foley as he finds evidence that the murderer of his boss has ties to California in an amusement park called Wonderworld. Returning to Beverly Hills once more, he reunites with Billy Rosewood to solve the case, along with Billy's new partner, Jon Flint. And they discover the security force of Wonderworld is actually part of a counterfeit money operation headed by Orrin Sanderson, who is the park manager. This is where we get into it. So after the success of Beverly Hills Cop 2, Eddie Murphy, he did not want to do a third movie. And he did say there was no reason to do it. And there was multiple versions of the earlier drafts which were going to have Foley, Rosewood, and Taggart going to London to rescue Captain Bogomil. But problems such as script issues and budgeting caused pre-production to slow down to where Ronnie Cox and John Aston left out. And they rewrote it to have Flint as one of the characters, and dialogue to have Taggart and retire and move on. And so the character of Cox was never addressed in the film or mentioned. And this had so many different versions of the script. And Ronnie Cox was asked to do Beverly Hills Cop 3, but he was not really fulfilling the script. There was also different ideas written by Robert Towne and also so many other scripts. And also they had Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer disagreeing on the script. And so the writer Steven DeZosa was brought in, and that's how we got what we got. And so after this, they cut the budget down to $55 million. And so what happens is we got a movie that is a pretty disappointing, frustrating film. This is not one of the worst sequels ever, but when you follow up to the first two great movies, unfortunately, this is where I have to say this is a movie that is very disappointing. And when I first saw this a couple years ago, I actually liked Beverly Hills Cop 3. It was the weakest one in the series, but I had some fun with it. But this recent rewatch wasn't really what I expected. It's not complete terrible though. I'll say this, despite a lot of issues I hold against this movie, I will say this, there are some entertaining moments in here. One, I will say that despite my problem with what they do with the character of Axel, I will say Eddie Murphy still does do a pretty good job as Axel Foley. He's in a different place in his life, which on one end I do appreciate the fact that they were trying to do something a little different. I will give credit to it. They did try to do something a little different, and Eddie Murphy still commits here. I also like some of the comedy in this movie. Some of the humor in here made me laugh, for the most part. I did enjoy a lot of the comedy that was being presented here. Also, from a filmmaking standpoint, it's not incompetently well handled, despite my feelings on Jon Landis as a person. As a director, he does do fine here. I will say that's one of the things I can admire, is that I do think the directing is good. There was some competent photography, and the locations here look very good here. And Judge Reinhold, Héctor Elizondo, Timothy Carhart, John Saxon, Teresa Randall, Stephen McHattie, Alan Young, they all do a pretty good job in the movie as well. I will also say the soundtrack is still entertaining despite it not being Harold Faltermeyer, or you don't have that classic Beverly Hills Cop theme. I will say I do like the soundtrack here. It's still entertaining here. And there are some moments of action that are very nice here. And I did like some of the cameos here by John Singleton, Ray Harryhausen, and Al Green. There are things in here I did not have a problem with when it comes to the movie. And I will say there are some moments where I feel like they did do the best they could despite the circumstances. Unfortunately, this is one of those cases where the biggest casualty of this movie is, despite this being a rated R rating, not PG-13, it doesn't have that edginess or something here. And I get what was going on during the time. Eddie Murphy was pretty depressed after some of his movies weren't doing well. And while he's good in the movie, I just don't get the edginess that I got with Alex Foley in the first two movies. And unfortunately, that's one of the biggest things that frustrates me, is because when I watch a movie like this, I should be very 100% in when it comes to the craziness of Eddie Murphy's Axel Foley, and unfortunately I don't get that here. Because I get you wanted to take this in a new direction, but I just didn't really get as much as I wanted to here. There's also some of the comedy in this movie just do not land because you don't have the writers of the first two in this. And this premise could have been a lot more stronger had you write this a little bit differently, and they just went full edginess to it, because unfortunately when you don't have the character of Taggart here and you just have Billy and Axel, it just doesn't really add to anything here. It feels like we missed them, and it just doesn't really fully work here. There's also a lot of decisions in terms of the story that I just didn't really like a lot of, in terms of where is Taggart, why is he not here. Also, I will say there are moments in this film where I'm just sitting there, and the pacing of this movie, despite it being one of the shorter ones, it just really doesn't do much for me. And I get the absence of Taggart is present here, and the infamous production issues nearly turned this into a complete disaster for me. And it's just a prime example of there's a lot of bad things that happened during the production that kind of made us get the frustrating movie that we got. And it's really heartbreaking to say that too, because when you're coming off of two great, awesome movies, trying to stick the landing doesn't really go for it the third time without Taggart, or even Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer being a part of this. And I know what went on. You don't have to tell me in the comments. It's just, it feels like the production issues are clearly valid on screen, and it feels more like a PG-13 more than a actual R rating here. Even though it's not PG-13, it just feels like they went that route, and it doesn't really fully go into what we're gonna get here. So that's one of my bigger issues when it comes to this film. So despite its short length, the edginess and the pacing does make this a little bit of a rougher watch here. But easily the biggest frustration here is that there are some cameos in this movie that just really didn't work for me. And I think you know where I'm going with this. George Lucas. I get it. He's the creator of Star Wars. It's cool to have some cameos here. Some of them I like Al Green, the late John Singleton, the late Ray Harryhausen, a few other ones here. But this is one of those cameos that just did not work here. And unfortunately, it just feels like I'm sitting here watching this and there's no reason for him to be in this. He's just only in here because he's the Star Wars guy. He doesn't really serve much of a purpose, and you could have completely cut him out of this entirely. So I will say that's one of my bigger issues when it comes to the movie, is that you did not really need it. Again, it sounds like I'm ranting heavily, which for good reason, because there's half of this movie that just feels like, because of the production issues, it should be a lot more better than what it is, and I feel like they just fully didn't try to stick the landing despite all of its production faults. I know some people will say this is their favorite one. I know some people actually say that here, and some people will say that it's not that bad. And again, it's not one of the worst things ever. It's just a painfully disappointing average third film, with all of its faults being shown and displayed on screen, unfortunately. So in conclusion, when it comes to Beverly Hills Cop 3, this is not a terrible movie. There is some fun to be had if you enjoyed the series, or if you just want to just enjoy this as its own movie, fine. But I can see why so many diehard Beverly Hills Cop fans of the franchise, especially Eddie Murphy and other people involved himself, clearly proclaimed this as the worst, and why his heart wasn't in there. It's not one of the worst movies ever made, nor is one of the worst sequels ever made. The problem that this has is that this is just a painfully disappointing average third film that really didn't stick the landing. Are there moments of fun to be had? Of course. There's moments here where I can enjoy myself, but unfortunately, this is one of those examples where it just didn't really stick the landing as much as it should. It's not unwatchable. I can watch it for a time waster, but this should have been a lot better than what it actually was.
Well, that's going to do it for the video that you just watched. If you want to see more, my channel icon is up here. If you want to see more content from me, all my social medias are right here in this end card. I will also leave a playlist and a video here for you to see what the channel is about. As always, acknowledge me, stay epictastic, join the Epictasticness, and you guys keep it cool.